Our Inspirational Indie Authors podcast stream is proudly sponsored by Book Vault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with Book Vault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. And you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an ally member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is crime novelist Ali Steed. After decades in financial journalism, Ali is winning awards in fiction, exploring the darker corners of the human mind through her police procedural series. We talk about what it took to overcome the fear of releasing that first novel, how she brings her investigative skills to crime fiction, and how life in Mallorca and a bit of shamanic training helped her embrace her creative path.
So, hi, I'm Ali Steed. I am a journalist by training, now an author. My genre is crime thrillers, police procedurals. And my first book, which came out late 2023, is All It Takes. And I am working on book 2. There's a bit of a backstory to that, so I'm sure we'll come to covering that later in the interview.
Okay. Yeah. So your debut novel, All It Takes, has won some awards. So congratulations there.
Thank you.
But first, tell me where you grew up and was reading and writing always a part of your life?
Yeah, I grew up in Oxfordshire in England. It's a place called Wantage, which is basically a market town. Famous for being the birthplace of King Alfred the Great, but yeah, that's its claim to fame. Mm-hmm. So I have always been very interested in reading and writing, actually. From a very young age, I was reading quite a lot, whether it was sort of fairy tale books when I was very young. And then probably around sort of 12, 13, I started trying to get a bit more serious because I thought I should. And I was reading sort of Jane Eyre, a few of the classics. I read quite a lot of E.M. Forster as well, just because that really piqued my interest at that stage. Mm-hmm. And it was also because I wanted to, it's a strange thing for a 12-year-old to think, but I was actually actively doing that to increase my vocabulary at that stage as well.
So you eventually went into journalism. Was your love of reading and writing the reason, or were there other factors?
Yeah, originally I wanted to be a doctor. That was my that was my big ambition when I was sort of going through secondary school. My dad was a nuclear physicist, so I grew up in a very kind of scientific household. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, medicine was everything. I wanted to do medicine. I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't know what sort of doctor, but I just knew that was what I wanted. And it was when I was sort of 17 doing my A-levels, one of my English teachers did a test. I didn't know this, but he did a test in one of our English classes. And it was a poem by Robert Frost. And we had to analyze it, talk about it, discuss it. When we finished and the class had ended, he actually said to me, "Alison, can you stay behind?" And I thought, oh, what did I do? Because I have the world's worst guilty conscience. If someone says to me, "Oh, can you just wait behind?" I'm thinking, "Oh no, what did I do?" But
you did something wrong with Robert Frost somehow.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah. But he actually said to me, "Do you know what that was?" And I said quite innocently, "A poem by Robert Frost." And he said, "Well, yeah, obviously, but actually that was the Cambridge University English entrance exam." And I sort of said, "Okay." And he said, "You were the only person in the whole class to pass it." And he actually said to me, he said, "You've got to rethink what you're doing. You have got to rethink being a doctor, because I think that your talents lie elsewhere." And my immediate reaction was to say, no, I still want to be a doctor, mm-hmm. And what happened was my chemistry A-level wasn't actually good enough to get me into medical school. And I retook it at evening classes while I was also working as a blood analyst in the day. And it still wasn't good enough to get me into medical school. And it was at that point I thought, I really have to rethink this now.
Hmm.
Because the
What
thing,
did your parents think of all this? Were they grooming you to become a doctor, or
no,
did they let you choose?
yeah, no, my parents were great actually. My mum's still alive. My dad sadly passed away, but no, they always have let me do whatever it is that I have sort of thought I wanted to do. There's never been any pressure to be a doctor or to be a lawyer or to be anything other than something that made me happy, which is amazing because I know.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm the black sheep of my family. I come from a family of doctors and engineers, and I'm the only one in I went into journalism and then writing. But yeah, there was never any pressure on me either, which helps.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, they've always been very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And the thing that I've always found easiest, and I kind of use that word advisedly, but the thing that I've always found easiest is writing. And so I then, 18, 19, I felt like the ground had actually been taken away from under my feet because I'd been so determined to be a doctor for such a long time that I kind of didn't then know what to do.
Hmm.
So I thought about journalism and I thought, is it really because I want to be a journalist, or do I think it's kind of glamorous, or do I think it's something that it isn't really? So I did some work experience, found that I absolutely loved it, and did an 11th hour UCAS application and got into two of the hardest universities to get into for a journalism degree. So, yeah, at that point, the doors started opening, and all of a sudden, I realised that that was actually the path I needed to be on. So that's how it started.
Hmm. That's great. So it wasn't so much your writing talent, although you must have had natural writing talent, but your ability to interpret a Robert Frost poem, I suppose, was was what did it, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it was a really interesting scenario because if I'm honest, because I grew up in Oxford, I didn't want to go to Cambridge because I loved Oxford, but I also didn't want to go to Oxford because I grew up in Oxford. So I wanted to move away from there. Um,
mhm.
and so I actually ended up going to what was called the London College of Printing and Distributive Trades, which is a bit of a mouthful, is now part of the University of the Arts London. And I did my degree there in journalism, which at the time you couldn't actually do journalism, pure journalism, as a degree in many places.
So after you got your degree, what did your career look like?
So I started off on a pensions magazine. I went for a job originally at a magazine called Portfolio, which was a monthly. And I sort of saw that and I thought, oh, that would be amazing. Like international travel, talking about money. Yeah, I could definitely do a bit of that. I
Hmm.
did the interview, and the guy who actually owned the company, he decided that he wanted me instead for his magazine, which was a magazine called Professional Pensions, which sounded very much less exotic. Um, but it was a weekly. And the training that I got there was perhaps some of the best training I could have got anywhere. I had an amazing news editor there. She was just incredible to sit and listen to in terms of how she interviewed people, how she got the information that she needed, and was still able to maintain really good relationships with all of the people that she was interviewing. And so I took so much knowledge from being in that environment. Um,
Hmm.
and I was actually headhunted quite quickly from there to go to the Financial Times Group, which was a magazine a newspaper actually called Financial Advisor, which is a more sort of broad topic based. So it was anything sort of financial services, investments, mortgages, pensions, health insurance, pretty much anything that you can imagine. And I was there for, I think it was about 18 months, maybe less actually, maybe 11 months. I can't remember. And then I was actually headhunted from there to go to the Daily Telegraph to be on the personal finance desk at the Daily Telegraph, which was amazing. And I was there for
Yeah.
7 years and I was the deputy personal finance editor when I left. So, yeah, quite.
That's amazing. You had a quite a quick rise in the journalism field.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I actually had an ambition that I didn't really tell anyone, but I had an ambition in my head. I wanted to be on a national by the time I was 20, no, sorry, by the time I was 30. And I did it at
Hmm.
27. So I was really,
Wow,
really
that's
pleased
amazing.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So meanwhile, though, did you have a secret novel that you wanted to write in your head, or did that come later?
No, I did actually. I have had the novel that I have actually put out has been in my head for probably nearly 30 years, if I'm honest. Um,
Hmm.
I it's gone through various iterations, as you can imagine, over that time. But I had an idea. I can't sort of go into too much detail about the idea itself because it kind of gives the game away of the novel. But um,
Hmm.
there was a particular book that my then partner had, and it was on our bookshelf, and I was just flicking through it, and I suddenly thought to myself, what would it be like if someone did this today? What would actually happen if someone did this right now? And that was the germ of the idea that then developed into the novel, All It Takes. And it took me a long time to actually kind of really knuckle down and do it. And the thing,
It was one of these, someday I'm going to write this book, someday I'm going to write this book, and then finally it bubbled to the surface.
yeah, it
Or
was actually a little bit more involved in a way because I had written parts of it. And my dad had always been a very, very strong sort of advocate for my right. I don't know, 8 or 9. I wrote this. It was a really silly thing, more sort of Barbara Taylor Bradford than, Patricia Cornwall. But it was a really silly thing that I'd put together. And my dad happened to read it. And I overheard him talking to someone about it. And he said, "Oh, actually, it's really good." He said, I know that she's my daughter, but I'm really impressed by what she's written."
Mhm.
And I was so touched by that. And it became much more poignant in a way because the year that he actually died was the year that I thought, I've got to take this seriously. I've got to do it because if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And that was the
Right.
trigger for me that made me really start taking it seriously. But
Yeah,
even,
yeah. And that boost from your father must have really helped too. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why the dedication in the front of that book is to him, actually. But yeah, it was I went to I forget what it's called now. It was it was at the University of York, and it was the Jericho writers event. I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to look it up. But basically I was there, and there was about sort of 10 or 12 of us on a table, and everyone was going around and asking each other what they were writing, and lots of people were doing YA at the time, and I was the only one on the entire table and that was doing crime, and I hadn't got to the point where someone had asked me, and they hadn't. They hadn't realized what I was doing. And everyone then started this conversation saying, "Oh, crime's dead. Crime is dead. Like, no one's doing crime anymore." And I was just sitting there kind of patiently thinking, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And
Mm.
they actually got to me and they said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing crime." And they all looked at each other as if to say, "Oh, well, we probably shouldn't have said that." And and all I said
Right.
to them was, well, it's been doing pretty well since Chaucer, so I'm not overly worried about people's opinions."
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Uh, so what did attract you to crime? Because your day job, you were writing about finance. What was the sort of the transition from finance to crime?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by serial killers. I can't put it any other way. The idea that someone has such a different mindset to me and to what you might consider, although I guess it's a moot point, right thinking people, to have such a different mindset, to be able to do that, to act on those kind of impulses without any conscience, I find astonishing, disturbing, and enthralling in equal measure.
Is it a need for you to get inside the mind of a serial killer, or sort of the lay out the general scenario?
It's a bit of both, I think, because the way that I write my books, I write them from different points of view. So one chapter will be most of the chapters, to be fair, will be the sort of the lead detective or the detective team. But then one or two chapters will be from the victim's perspective, and then other chapters will be from the killer's perspective. And
Hmm.
just having
Sounds like your journalism training gave you the ability to really research what you're talking about too, I bet.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
it's been key, Howard, to be honest.
Hmm.
And just allowing the freedom to get into that mindset without actually getting into the mindset, if you know what I mean, to learn enough to understand where it comes from, and then sort of interpret that to a fictional character. That I find part of the challenge and also part of the excitement of writing books.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have said to me that some of the things they found very difficult, some of the chapters they found quite difficult to read because it is written in that way, particularly if it's from the victim's perspective. And in a way, for me, that's kind of the point, because I want people to understand the position that that person has been put in through no fault of their own. And it just helps to immerse people more in the story than
Right.
it does to just have it from one person's point of view. Because I know that there's, the unreliable narrator is quite common in a lot of writing, but
Hmm.
I don't find that to be the best method for me. Just actually having different points of view, I feel, gives a more rounded story and creates a more
So you're not,
rounded book.
yeah, you're not stuck inside just one person's head.
Yeah.
So what's the inspiration behind your main character, DCI Caroline Cramer? They say that first books are always semi-autobiographical. Is this the police inspector version of you?
I would say no, but other people might disagree. um, no, I don't think she is particularly like me. Our backgrounds are very different. The one thing that made me write her the way that I've written her is I got kind of fed up of reading about a detective who was an alcoholic, or a detective who was a drug
Mhm.
addict, or a detective who was a bad actor within the job, and while there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, I just felt like it was done so often and so much that there was room for something that was very different.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah, over here in America, I watch the BBC or BritBox, and every single English inspector, a police drama has a police inspector with a shady past. Every one of them.
yeah, exactly. And
So,
that was the thing that I kind of wanted to get away from with her. She has some problems. I mean, no one goes through life without any problems, so it would be unrealistic for her to be completely without any baggage. But it's just different, and it's coming from a different place, and her approach is slightly tempered by her background as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how I write her, I think she's much less forgiving than I am. I think in terms of work, I would say that I'm not easy to work with in the journalistic sense. I actually am quite, because everything that I've done with finance particularly, it has to be so precise. There's no, it's
mhm.
either 0.75 or it's zero point 0.5. It can't be, there's sort of a bit between one or the other. So everything has to be very, very exact. And that's how I've been trained. And that's obviously how I've trained other people. So, in the sense of, being very kind of driven and trying to get the best out of other people, I would say there's a similarity there. But I don't see much of myself in her, and vice versa,
Mhm.
if I'm honest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, that's, confusing the author with the main character is a trap that many readers fall into, and it's not often true. Now, you also work in a physical environment that sounds very beautiful in Spain. How's that How's the environment influenced your writing process or the themes in your work?
That's a really good question because I actually haven't found it to be too distracting, if I can put it that way, because a lot of the
Hmm.
stuff that I'm writing is very dark. And I'm actually, I mean, people who know me, they are quite surprised at the books that I write because I'm kind of, I'm very easygoing, chatty, really enjoy having a laugh. And then when they read my books, it's a bit like, oh wow, okay. Um,
Yeah.
and the environment here, because as you say, it's incredibly beautiful and it's very much led by nature here, which is one of the things that I absolutely love. It's it's really nice to have that contrast because it's sometimes when you get engrossed, I don't know if you were the same, Howard, especially with sort of writing or journalism, but when I get really into the flow, I can lose 6 hours and not
Hmm.
really even realize that 6 hours have gone by.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then having the ability to go out and have a walk, for example, in just some incredibly stunning scenery, or, we've got some caves near to us that are beautiful. And just being able to go into that sort of natural environment and have a bit of an antidote to all the work, it's very
Right.
balancing. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Whatever you did, it worked. You won an award. Tell me about what you won.
It's the Best Indie Book Award. I won the suspense and thriller category for 2024.
Wow, that's wonderful. So that must have been a real confidence booster for you.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I got the email quite late at night and I was just about to go to bed. I was about to shut my computer down and this email came up and I opened it. And at first I had to sort of read it a couple of times before I really realized that they were saying, "Oh, congratulations, you've won this award." And I was thinking, "Oh, did I enter that? Yeah, I must have entered that." And then it suddenly kind of the penny dropped, and I was like, oh wow, look. And I said to my wife, I was like, "Oh, look what's happened." So yeah, it was really exciting. And I actually I was so thrilled. I spoke to the organizer of the awards because I wasn't clear on, essentially obviously what you can do beforehand, what you can do when it's announced. And I wanted to do a press release, which I haven't actually sent out yet, which is bad. But I wanted to ask, a few questions about, is this the most number of entries you've ever had? Is this is it an award that
You want you're being a reporter,
yeah,
again.
yeah,
So
exactly.
exactly, yeah.
And she said, yeah, they had the highest number of entries that they've ever had for that award that year. So, I mean, it just kind of made me feel so grateful and, very excited to have actually won in a year that was so
Right.
competitive as well. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
thrilled, still thrilled.
So how is that translated, if at all, into sales? And I guess the second part of the question is how do you market your books?
So translation to sales, it has a little bit. I need to do more marketing is the is the crux of it. I do Amazon ads, which are not too bad, but I need to kind of tighten up my process and improve that. I'm looking at doing Facebook ads because I've been sort of monitoring and reading a lot of the Matt Holmes information and
Hmm.
I found his stuff very useful. So yeah, I still have quite a lot of things to do though. I need to sort my newsletter. I need to, boost my Facebook author page and get more engagement and yeah, all the things that I absolutely need to do. But I've been really trying to get book two out, which I've spent last year I spent writing book two, but I worked on book two and it turned into book three. So this year I've been writing book two and I'm at the stage now. I have an amazing editor called Rebecca Miller, who is one of the best crime suspense thriller editors out there. And I value her input so highly. I can't even begin to tell you. She's so professional. She really knows her stuff. And we talked about my original book two. We both agreed it would work better as book three. So I then wrote book two. the second version. And I sent it to her at the beginning or sort of early in January. And we talked about it at the end of last month. And we both decided that actually the first half of book two works really well as book two, but the second half might work better as book four. So
Hmm.
I'm currently in the position where I've got the second half of book two to write and the first half of book four to write. And then by the end of this year, I should have four books in total out. So
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great.
yeah,
Yeah, 4 in 1 year. That's amazing. Now, in the meantime, are you still working full time?
I am. Yes, I mainly do corporate writing now. I've got a few clients that I write, some finance, some in other areas. And yeah, so it's sort of juggling a lot of balls and trying to make sure I don't drop any. That's the
Exactly. I know
key.
how that feels. Yeah. Is this eventually what you want to do when you grow up? Is this, eventually full time and quit your day job?
I would love it to be. And in fact, Howard, I listened to the podcast you did with Orla Ross the other day, where you said about giving up journalism and going full steam ahead
Mhm.
into editing and writing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it really struck a chord with me. So yeah, I would absolutely love to do that. I obviously still need to pay the bills at the moment, so I'm going to have to do a transitional thing, a transitional phase rather than, literally leaping from one to the other. I feel a little bit like I can't afford to let go of this vine that I'm holding on to before I cling on to the next
Yeah.
one at this stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of my transition, the decisions were made for me because newspapers were just no longer hiring.
Mm.
But my identity ever since college was wrapped up in journalism. I'm a journalist. This is what I do for a living.
Mm.
And it was hard for me to say, well, no, I have these journalism skills in research and in writing and in editing, but I could use them in other ways. And it was hard for me to switch that identity from journalist to editor and author.
Mm. And I totally
Yeah.
understand that because I agree with you. It becomes so much a part of who you are. And I mean, even to the extent that, I can be writing a message down for somebody and I'm still writing it in T-line shorthand. It's kind of
Right.
it's kind of crazy things like that. But
Yeah, yeah. Even texts I send, are full sentences grammatically correct. So
absolutely.
people make fun of me for
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. And so I do understand that. And I think the first time I really experienced that feeling was when I left the Telegraph, because being on a national, you had lots of people who they were interested in you because of your job. They weren't interested in you because of you. And sometimes it was easy to tell who those were, and sometimes it was a little bit harder. And that was the first time that I really kind of felt that, oh, okay, so you're not actually interested in me as a person. You're interested in me because of what I can give you. Okay.
Hmm.
And then, so that was quite an eye-opening transition going freelance. And then moving into, a separate phase once again. I think that I'll probably have a similar kind of feeling. I
Hmm.
don't think I'll have the same experience because obviously I'm not in that same role now. But yeah, I think it's going to be a similar kind of feeling. And I absolutely agree with you about newspapers not hiring. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday and I was saying to them that if you look back, if I look back now into even 15, 20 years ago as to what I was earning doing freelance work as a journalist, that hasn't really changed that much. And
No.
we're a lot
Yeah,
further on now and things are a lot more expensive.
exactly.
And that's why
Yeah,
I've
but
ended.
the salaries have not kept pace
Yeah,
at all.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, ideally if I could actually become a full-time author, that would be not only a dream fulfilled, if I'm honest, but it would be an absolute pleasure. Not that I don't like doing the writing that I do, because I absolutely love it, actually. Any kind of writing, I think it's amazing that people pay me to write,
Hmm.
because it is such a joy for me. I love taking things that are complicated and making it easier for people to understand, which is obviously why finance was an ideal space for me. And fundamentally, I really like helping people. So being able to write in finance and knowing that what I was actually writing, rather than say the football schools or something like that, but what I was writing was actually capable of changing people's lives. I did some campaigning work while I was at the Telegraph. I worked on uncovering an investment scandal. I took a lot of government departments to task for things that they were doing wrong. I won a particular award because I've won 8 journalism awards in my time as well. And I won an award for a campaign that I did on long-term care, where people were being forced to sell their houses in the UK when the government should have been paying their care bills. And I worked with the Health and Parliamentary Ombudsman on that, and we managed to get a lot of money back for people. And another campaign I did was the government, the Ministry of Defence was habitually taxing war pensions, and they should never be taxed. And that was another campaign. Again, we got them to go back a long way, and a lot of families whose relatives had died got money, and also people who had been taxed when they shouldn't have been got money as well. So those are the things that really excite me. Just being able to help people, I think is really key. And so I'm also thinking about writing some finance books because I have all this knowledge.
That's great.
Yeah. I have all this knowledge in my head. Well, I may as well.
You'll be one of the few authors out there who actually knows about finance too. And, maybe after we're done with this podcast, you can help me with some of my help me with my taxes.
Yeah, happy to. No problem. Now, one thing I was going to talk to you about was the difficulty that I had actually getting my first book out, because that was one of the reasons it took me so long. Now, part of that was because I was a journalist, and I don't know if you felt the same way, but for me, being a journalist and presenting articles, you're essentially taking other people's words and presenting an argument that people will either agree with or they'll disagree with, but you present both sides in terms of fairness. The thing that I found very difficult with actually writing a book was that this had come out of my own head. And therefore, for me, it felt very much more personal and slightly more scary to release into the world. And I don't think it was something like imposter syndrome. I don't think it was anything other than, what are people going to think of me? What are people going to think of what I'm writing? Am I good enough? Yeah. All of the things that I know lots and lots of people think.
Yeah.
And I
know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I went on a bit of a journey, because I ended up doing some shamanic training as part of understanding what my sort of blocks were to releasing this book. And it has helped me not only in terms of getting the first book out, but also in actually creating a better balance in the way that I work. And like I was saying earlier on about nature and sort of working with nature. And so I've done quite a lot of shamanic training, which I have found it incredibly helpful with my writing. And it's something that in the future I would, because as I was saying, I love helping people. It's something that I would actually really love to start doing, sort of some retreats or some courses or something to help people get over the same kind of blocks that I had.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah. It's so, I mean, it's very, I appreciate lots of people will think this is really woo-woo, and that's fine, because if you said to me 10 years ago I'd be doing this, I would have laughed. But
no, there's something to that. I come from the world of nonfiction my entire career, and my first work of fiction is coming out in April. And it's nerve-wracking for me because, like you say, it came from my head.
Yeah.
I made it up. And it's a whole different kind of writing for me.
Yeah. And you feel exposed.
yeah, you seem exposed, and I have to give myself permission to say that this is okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it took me quite a long time to kind of get to grips with that. And I think the lessons that I've learned and the tools that I now have, if I'm able to help other people with that, I would love to. And that's something that I'm kind of exploring sort of slightly informally at the moment, but I'm looking at it, particularly because I live in such a beautiful place. It's something that I would love to do in maybe a year or so, just to run a retreat for writers and using shamanic tools, to not only help them with any blocks in a similar way that I help myself and learned to help myself by working with tutors and mentors, but also to give people the tools to actually tap into creativity in a way that they actually can't do in a in a sort of a day-to-day run-of-the-mill state. If you're literally kind of
Right.
running after the kids, or you're doing 10 jobs to make ends meet while you're also trying to become an author or something.
Exactly.
There's
Yeah.
so much going on, and
Well,
I think it would really help people. So the shamanic training is, if you think of a traditional shaman, so you would think of a healer, for example, or you would think of someone who might be able to see into the future or something like that. There's so many aspects to shamanic work. There's sort of the creative side, which is very much what I tap into. There's, the love of the earth in terms of working with nature, using nature as a way to help people heal. Because I do a variety of sort of shamanic work. I actually do help people with sort of trauma responses and things like that, which is part of it. But it's a kind of meditation is the easiest way to describe it. It's called journeying. But you use drumming as a way of changing the brainwave state from the beta state, which is our normal state, to the theta state, which is still conscious, but you are more open to being able to expand your conscience and your knowledge. There's no drugs involved. People can do that with various things, ayahuasca or whatever. That's not what I do. I'm not into that. It's not something that I think would help me, because the journeying aspect I find very much easier without any kind of, even cacao or coffee or caffeine would get in the way for me. So yeah, it's very much more allowing yourself to open your mind to
mhm.
information that you would find very difficult to access excuse me, in your day-to-day life. That's
Right. Right.
it's hard to explain without actually doing it, but
No, I think I understand. I'm like you. I have a day job that pays the bills, and I do my creative work on the side. But it's hard to say, okay, sit down now, be creative now.
exactly, yeah. and
Yeah,
so and
yeah,
so it's a way of, for example, there's an archetype called the creatrix in the shamanic training, and you can call on the creatrix to actually help you to be creative, literally to be creative. And again, as I say, it's the kind of thing that some people will think, yeah, okay. But I would have been the same, as I say, 10 years ago. But
hmm
but it really, really has made a difference to my ability to get information, even if I'm struggling with something more mundane. I can do a
right.
journey to find an answer.
Sounds fascinating. It doesn't sound, woo woo to me. It sounds like you're on your own journey. You have your own character arc, from hard-nosed journalist to someone who's more open to these other avenues of creativity.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Ali. I look forward to hearing more about your work in this other field. So maybe we can have you back on once you write your how-to books on that.
Great. Love to.
So wonderful. Well, thank you, Ali. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And
Sure.
yeah, hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye.
Howard. Bye bye.
You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. This podcast stream is proudly sponsored by BookVault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with BookVault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. If you are a member of Ally and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you can inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.